Right, sadly, my problems with my recording software are persisting. It managed to cut out when I had just one position left. This is a game from 2014, which I was intending to cover at the end of the last video, but I've had to end up calling that Rook and Pawn versus Rook Longside Defense 1, and this is going to be called the same thing, but 2. And I left you the decision, do you want to play G5 or King H4? King H4 leads almost by force into a position that's got nothing to do with longside defence in Rook and Pawn versus Rook, but it is quite entertaining to look at. G5 leads to, which is what was played in the game, leads to loads of ideas on that theme, and both sides in this 2014 game played lots of inaccurate moves, just sort of showing how hard the techniques involved are. I mean, I think I demonstrated in the last video how hard I find it. I did pretty well. I was quite pleased with how well I did against Stockfish, but it came across, I'm sure, in the video that it wasn't massively convincing. Like, oh yeah, this guy is on it. He knows exactly what he's doing. Definitely not. This stuff's hard. And the two players in this 2014 game clearly found it quite hard as well. There were lots of inaccurate moves played, but I think it's instructive to look at them, to be honest, and think about the moves that we should have been playing. So I guess the ideal is that we end up playing these positions perfectly in our games, and we are just completely all over long-sided defence, which I think is probably the hardest of all the defensive techniques, that certainly of the ones we've looked at so far. Anyway, let's look at this King H4 line, which is very entertaining. You can see the idea behind it. Like, the problem with G5 is that we've cut our king off. All right, we're going to swap the H pawn for the G pawn straight away, and it's just Rook and Pawn versus Rook. But you would need to judge whether, given your king's cut off, whether you're going to be able to hold that. It is a draw because our king's on the short side and our rook's going to make its way over to the long side, and we'll see that kind of in the game. But King H4 also leads to a draw. Black would bring their king in, King E5, and then we carry on with our king journey back, having been trying not to get cut off, basically. I mean, the problem White's got now is that after Rook F3 check, for example, and King G2, the G pawn, and the black king squeezes into F4, and the G pawn is about to go. And if you're defending against both these pawns, you are in big trouble. Okay, in fact, the only move that White's now got that doesn't just lose immediately is Rook H1. But this line, I mean, Black doesn't have to go down this route, but probably would. Sort of sensing, reaching sort of the touchdown area with that pawn. Black can push the pawn, but what's interesting about this is that it leads by force to a rook versus queen position, because this black rook was just sort of precariously stuck on F3, and once the e-pawn got pushed, it wasn't defended anymore. Check, hits the rook, takes, queen. And this is actually a table-based draw. Not just a table-based draw. I mean, our king's not in a great spot to begin with, but this is a fortress, and practically speaking, White stands good drawing chances there. It's actually quite a hard fortress to break down. I don't like the starting position of our king, but apparently that is going to be a draw. Excuse me. Very interesting, but nothing to do with Rook and Pawn versus Rook and long-sided defence. Let's go through the move that was played in the game. G5 takes Rook F3, King G4, sensible move. You try and get your king as close to the action as possible, and Black played King D4. Now, what would you play here as White? The move played in the game was fine. It's still a draw. This is a draw for White at the moment. You can't get your king any closer. Obviously, most king moves are obviously very silly. In fact, I can't see any king moves on the engine's top 5. I'm tempted to say a king move might even be lost straight away, but so a rook move is clearly sensible. And given that, where would you put your rook? Well, if you're going for long-sided defence, Rook A1, seems pretty sensible. You're either going to be checking that black king forever, or black's got to move their rook across to try and give their king some shelter, like rook d3, for example, trying to tuck the king in here. White can just play king f4. So you could say that that was a simpler draw than the route that white took. I mean, it's subjective, but I don't know. I like rook a1. In the game, we saw, I mean, in retrospect, by the way, not like, oh, I would have played rook a1. I mean, we're talking about top players playing these games. Rook d1 check. Rook d3. There's a sort of a bit of messing about. That's, I guess, that rook e1's to stop the king getting into e3. Rook d2. White's always trying to get their king closer if they can. All of these are sort of sensible moves by white. Rook went back to f8, so the king's still cut off. We saw another check, king e3, another check, king d3. Kept checking until the black king was down here, and then went over to the long side. So it's all just completely drawn. There's nothing wrong with the way that white's been playing this. Rook d8. Now what would you play? Because this is the first point where white went wrong. What would you do in this position? You can even pause the video and have a think about it. Now, if you watched the first video on this, and I think you would be mad to try and follow anything of what's going on in this position, unless you had watched that first video, or unless you know it all inside out already, in which case, why are you watching any of these videos, to be honest? When the rook goes back in this long-sided defence, it's these checks over here that are a bit annoying and very threatening. I mean, for example, king g2. Black's won, rook g8, the white king's getting cut off on the h-file. The Lucena position is going to be reached very quickly, so king g2 is clearly a disaster. In the game, king f4 was played, which also now loses, okay, because the white king's now too far away, and it sort of needs to hover on these two squares, you remember. But something I did in that game where I was playing, trying to defend this sort of position against Stockfish, was that when the rook went back, ready to give checks over here, I started checking the attacking side's king. I mean, it was over the other side of the board, and I was black, not white. But so ignore all that. But by symmetry, that's what happened when the rook went back, ready to try and shove our king off onto the h-file. I started checking, and it is actually the best idea here. Okay, so rook a2 check. If rook d2, then you just come back to a1. If the pawn is pushed, remember we just hover on these two squares. That's the technique. King g2. Black's not threatening anything. Okay, Black's best try here, probably, is rook d3. And I've not cheated and looked at the engine moves yet. I think I'm going to look at it and it's going to say that's the only drawing move. And I'm right, so I'm quite chuffed with myself for that. That is the only drawing move. That's the one that gets the double exclamation mark in the textbook. It's the one that Magnus Carlsen failed to find in that game in 2006. He played rook a2, which blundered to king e1. Different colours, different side of the board, but by symmetry, that's the move that was played. So yeah, rook a2 check. So in the game, king f4 was played. There's loads more to come. It's not over there, just showing you how hard this stuff is. e3, rook a2 check, rook d2, rook a3 was played. Now what would you do as black? Because white's actually played this pretty well, given they're in a losing position. What would you do here as black? Black's only got one winning move, and they didn't play it. So in the game, rook d4 check was played. But black should play rook d3, rook a2 check, king to e1, and if rook a1 check, king back out to f2. This king's just too far away. Okay, if on that last move the white king was there, not hitting the e-pawn, we would block like that. Very similar to the Carlsen game that I was just talking about. In fact, exactly the same as that. But because the white king's on f4 attacking the e-pawn, you can't play that. That would just blunder your e-pawn away straight away. Well, take the rook first, obviously. But white isn't controlling God, my mouse is having trouble. White isn't controlling the f2 square. So you just slip out to f2, and black clearly won that. So rook d3 should have been played here. Black played rook d4 check in the game, and now it's a draw again. King g3. Black played rook d3. What would you play here? If we've got this long side defence starting to master it, we should just immediately know the move that we play here. In fact, it just transposes into a line we just saw. You should play rook a1. Okay. I basically had this position a minute ago when I said I was chuffed with myself because I had moved the king from g2 to g3. That's the double exclamation mark move from the textbooks, and we can transpose into it here with rook a1. In the game, rook a2 check was played, and that's now blundered away the draw. Black plays king e1. It's now checkmate in 49, apparently. Rook a1 check, rook d1. It's still not over, though, and there's still more drama to come. Rook a2, e2 is absolutely fine by black. King g2. And I mean, in the game, rook b1 was played, which is absolutely fine. You could argue that rook d8 is simpler, just aiming to come over here, and we've reached the Lucena position, basically, haven't we? This isn't really long-sided defence anymore. We've basically reached the Lucena position, but rook b1 was played. White played king f3. Rook b3 check was played. So this isn't the sort of the textbook conversion of the Lucena position, I've got to say. King g2, and incredibly here, after all those good moves, black now blundered away the win with rook c3. I mean, there's loads of winning moves. There's 3 winning moves for black. Most of the one that's third down the list is the one I would go for, which is just get my rook back and repeat, but and try and do something a bit more sensible with the Lucena position in a minute. Although maybe you're actually struggling to get into that. But the winning move here straight away is rook e3. Just sort of wins on the spot. Black didn't play that. Black played rook c3 and rook a1 check, king d2, king f2, rook c2. We saw lots of messing about for ages. And yeah, I mean, it's just completely drawn now, king e3. And white decided to speed up proceedings with a move. I did this in the first rank defense when it was a knight's pawn, this stalemate trickery. Black can play rook d3. You can't swap the rooks because that's a lost king and pawn ending. But you can play rook b3, and after king e4, rook back to b2, you've got a king and a rook attacking the e-pawn. The e-pawn is gone. And they agree to draw. I say they agree to draw there. I guess black, probably very annoyed at this stage, played rook e3, and the draw was achieved there. So that was a really good game, that one. Loads of instructive stuff, loads of inaccuracies, and yeah, I mean, I would definitely be playing through that game again without any of the commentary and seeing if I can just identify all the mistakes that were made. That's a really good way to sort of learn any theoretical, the sequence of moves you need to draw or to win or whatever. Just get the text list of the game, play it through. Don't have a computer or anything, and just make some notes and say, well, I think that was a mistake because of this, and blah blah blah, and then give yourself some marks afterwards. Right, that's done on long side defence. I'm going to be moving on to vertical cutoffs and horizontal cutoffs next, which I think is a bit of a hike down in difficulty. Not necessarily a hike down to the point that I actually fully understand it, but maybe a lot closer anyway.